Hello, everybody, and welcome to, we're on chapter 5, but this is part 3 of chapter 5, video 3, because this is kind of like the central core of Sacred Geometry, Philosophy, and Worldview, which is the book which forms the basis for this entire course, Reality Atlas. Thanks for joining us again. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing well today, yeah. How are you?
Very good. Very excited about this particular video because it's all about the invisible domain, or what you call soul mind. And it's funny, like sometimes when I'm like going through different aspects of the model and I'm reading the book, I'm kind of reaching and scratching my head, particularly some of the more specific scientific concepts, they don't land on me kind of like easily, where this particular part I totally get. I'm completely at home. This is kind of like where I feel most at ease with the entire Reality Atlas model,
Yeah, and the invisible domain speaks to our own lived experience that we undeniably, each of us has an interior. We have our own point of view. We know what it's like to live, to have these challenges. We know, we relate. And it's curious to me that in science, kind of in a way denies all of this and says it's an illusion, or it's trivial, or it's not something scientific. And fair enough, because science, when you realize what science is, it's really the study of the visible domain. So it should really have very little to say maybe about the invisible domain, but they go too far in science when they claim that there's no such thing as a soul, or there's no such thing as an interior. It's an illusion, I think.
Yeah.
And so this chapter is kind of unpacking a lot of the complexities that I see in the invisible domain, and trying to kind of categorize them in some way. So it's a bit of a challenge maybe for me to try to explain all of that to you without you reading all of the text. But let me give a shot at it. And I kind of wanted to jump off and start with the more scientific perspective, and then we'll move into the more humanistic one. But so I want to start with the idea of quantum physics, and so this is obviously something that's come about by studying the world mind. But there's something on the edge of that suggests another domain, and that would be virtual particles. So I don't know if you're aware, but in quantum physics, they have this idea that pairs of virtual particles, like a photon and an antiphoton, come into existence for a brief period of time before they annihilate each other and then disappear again. And so you think, wow, that's really interesting. That's kind of exotic, right? And so there's evidence of these particles kind of coming into existence in our visible world and then disappearing, right? And you think, oh, maybe that just happens out in outer space or something. Well, actually, those virtual particles mediate all forces in the universe. So, for example, with electromagnetism, like a magnet on a fridge, you feel the force of that magnet when when you're holding it near the metal, you're kind of pulling it away. You can definitely feel that, right? When that magnetism, the force that's carried is carried by virtual particles. So the momentum of a photon is what pushes on another electron. It's what transfers momentum. Without the virtual world, without this invisible interaction, there would be no force.
The electron wouldn't move. Is that what you mean?
It wouldn't move. And not only that, but there are other force carriers that are responsible for the weak force and the strong force. Basically, all forces in the universe are carried through this invisible domain, and
called virtual particles.
Virtual particles. And so I speculate that this is kind of a hint that there's something deeper going on here, that there's an interaction with another domain, a whole other domain that we can't weigh and measure. You see, we can feel the effect in the visible, but we can't ever really weigh or measure the virtual particles because they're gone too quickly. And the stronger the force, the less time they're there, because it's it's all regulated by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So a really weak force can last for a longer time, and a stronger force lasts for less time, and it falls off with the square of distance. So it ends up being this beautiful mathematical relationship. But the reason that happens is because these virtual particles come into existence, and the duration depends upon the amount of force that they're carrying. So anyway, that's my kind of look into the microcosm and seeing a trace of that evidence that there's something deeper going on. There's another realm that's interacting with the visible world and regulating it and causing all of the forces and all of the movement and all of the dynamism in the visible world is mediated by the invisible mind or invisible world. So that's on the small scale, but it also works all the way up through all the layers of the onion. So on the scale of a human being, you have a brain, and the brain is in the visible world. And the brain is made of like all these connections, right? But no matter, we can get lost in the complexity of that. And
86 billion neurons, is it?
It's
That's
like,
what I heard last time.
Yeah, I have a quote in here that talks about, here it is. Maybe I'll just read that quote because it's really mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So this quote is by Stephen Smith, who's a professor of molecular and cellular physiology at Stanford. So he says, one synapse by itself is more like a microprocessor with both, is like a microprocessor with both memory storage and information processing elements than a mere on-off switch. In fact, one synapse may contain on the order of 1,000 molecular scale switches. A single human brain has more switches than all of the computers and routers and internet connections on Earth. There are more than 125 trillion synapses just in the cerebral cortex alone. That's roughly equal to the number of stars in 1,500 Milky Way galaxies.
Yeah.
The brain's overall complexity is almost beyond belief. End quote.
Wow.
So, I mean, that's kind of amazing. And we have a tendency to get lost in that, lost in the stars, but no matter how many connections there are, or how many miles of pathways there are in the brain, we could say that it's all electrically short-circuited, isn't it?
Yeah.
What determines which switches turn on and off, and what gets stored in memory? So the modern understanding of the brain is much more complicated than the mill that Leibniz described in the 18th century, about going into a mill and looking at all the parts and asking, like, I see all these parts, but there's nothing here that would explain a perception. It's just all physicality, it's all parts. And so what we're missing with these understandings and looking in the world mind of the brain is, where is that lived experience that we're all undeniably having? Where is that coming from? Well, it must exist in an invisible domain that is closely interconnected with the visible brain. So I believe that your mind is not in your brain. The brain is just a switchboard in a way, our filtering mechanism. And your mind exists in the invisible domain. And what mediates them must be a quantum effect inside the brain. And I know that Stuart Hamerhoff, who's an anesthesiologist, and Sir Roger Penrose, who's a physicist, have corroborated that the brain is actually doing something quantum. And it's probably in the microtubules inside the brain's neurons. And so this is the bridge that makes this quantum bridge between the invisible and the visible. It's a way that your mind can interact with your brain. And there's also a case example that's very instructive about this. They did a CAT scan on this young man. Dr. John Lorber, professor of pediatrics at Sheffield University, did a CAT scan on this student who was a mathematics student. He had actually tested his IQ of 126, so a very bright person. And they did a CAT scan on him because they noticed that his head seemed to be like swollen. And so in the university, they checked it out, and they discovered that, let me get this quote right. He examined the boy's head by CAT scan to discover that the student had virtually no brain. This student had a layer of cerebral tissue less than 1 millimeter deep, covering the top of his spinal column.
Wow. No brain.
It was all filled with liquid. The cerebral spinal fluid had gotten trapped and compressed his entire brain to 1 millimeter on top of his brainstem.
Wow.
And yet he seemed like a normal person who interacted with the world and took tests and seemed fine. And this is an example of like where the doctors have no idea how to explain that, because they're under the paradigm that all of your cognition happens in your brain, you know, but somehow or other his mind was still able to interact with his body and drive it in some way. And how that happened is a mystery. But I think this is a good case example that kind of hints at something deeper going on, you know, that another way of thinking of it is thinking that the consciousness must be in the brain, right? Because we can probe it in surgery or with electromagnetic waves, and we can see that when we perturb this area, the person goes, oh, that tastes like almonds. And you're like, what? You know, and oh, that reminds me of rainbows. And so we start to map out like the different areas of the brain seem to be storing those things. But imagine that you were, you took a television apart and you were messing with the integrated circuits, and you were doing monkeying around in the electronics of the television, and you're like, there, those actors on the screen obviously are in here. They're in this machine.
In the little screen. Yeah.
It must be in this machine. You know, and it's actually, we know, okay, wait a minute. No, it's just a receiver. The television is just receiving that information. So I think that the brain is very much like that. It's like a television. It's receiving the show, which is being broadcast from your mind.
That's amazing, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea. Actually, I was only listening last night to Ram Dass, you know, one of my all-time faves. And he was using this exact analogy, you know, that our brains are just like a TV set he was using, you know, and there's like different channels on the TV set, click, 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 you know, and he was speaking about like we have the potential or the capacity to flick between channels, you know, but most people just live their lives out on channel 1 and 2, you know, but there's actually like channel 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and probably people watching this have tapped into a few of those higher channels, you know, and this is getting kind of like right to the part of this whole trip that speaks to me the most, is that here's where it gets cool. I totally believe that our brains are receivers, you know, and our minds live outside of our craniums, and that this machinery in here kind of just actually, you know, tunes itself in to whatever frequency it is that we want to access, you know, in a much bigger intelligence, you know. And so then I'm thinking, you know, when we meditate on, like, say, geometric shapes, right, these perfect forms, which are full of truth, beauty, and goodness, like we spoke about before, in a way, what we're doing is we're bringing our own sort of tuning apparatus, you know, we're bringing the qualities of our ability to receive, to tune in to kind of a higher frequency. You know, like if we sort of only watch like the daily news, it's kind of one type of bandwidth, it's one type of frequency. And, you know, that's ever present in our world. And a lot of us kind of just get conditioned into that. But it's just a choice where you begin to look at something like a beautiful Sri Yantra or a Metatron's cube, and those forms lie outside of the mainstream news, at least, you know. And then what we're doing is we're tuning into those perfected forms, and we can kind of come into harmony with them. I've experienced this over and over again in myself, witnesses in many, many people at the workshops. And so I've become convinced that our brain, as a receiver analogy, is the way it is, you know, and then we have this capacity then to almost choose, you know, what we want to vibe with, you know. I think it has a lot to do with your sort of your ability to raise your energy centers and stuff like this. There's probably a whole load of stuff that I don't understand going on with it, but there's something about these shapes and our mind as a receiver that brings us into a resonance with the qualities of those frequencies.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say is we can get onto like these high grade channels courtesy of these shapes. Am I on the right page, by the way, or have I just totally smashed what you're saying?
No, you are, but I'd like to kind of make it more specific, as is my way of being, as I'm very particular. So let me just try to
thank God for you.
Explain that the way I would, which is that let's say that I want to impart some knowledge that I have to you. So the way I would do that would be to take that knowledge from my soul and put it into it's in my brain, and then it goes through my body system and it goes into the world mind, and it's stored in the world temporarily as my voice and my video,
or a book or
a book or a whatever. But it's an artifact in world mind, and then you observe that world and you absorb that content, and if I am skillful in my delivery of the content, it will resonate with your soul, and you will then take that information into your soul, and some of it will become like part of you, and it may even affect you in some way. It might just be stored as data that you can use in the future for a practical reason. It depends on what I'm trying to communicate. But that would be the process of learning. So it always goes from the soul to the world to the other soul. And so that's always how it works. And we're just so used to that we don't even think about it. When we deal with geometry in particular, we're actually, using the world as a medium of exchange in a way to record this information. But it's connecting your soul with the intelligible domain.
Directly.
So it's a really soul to universal mind, individual soul to universal soul connection there. And it has a different quality, different character. And so it has more of a character of remembering than me trying to transfer something from me to you.
Yes. Yeah. It's very, very different.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's more, that's why I say we're not so much teachers, but more like guides, because we're trying to guide you to make this connection yourself.
Yeah.
From your soul to the universal mind. And then who knows what will happen?
And sorry, can I jump in there? Just the universal mind then, supposedly holds all that could possibly ever be known, right? And so if you get a direct connection to that, then you are already connected to everything that could ever be known, if you like, direct, you're hardwired. And so this is kind of like, I've been saying this like in all my workshops, but my articulation of it is getting clearer now, courtesy of Reality Atlas, but I've always sort of said, the person who knows what's best for you is you. But what I mean by that is the most kind of like valuable insights that I've got to on my journey in this lifetime has been insights and information that has come from within me, right? I mean, I read all these books. I love all these ideas. I draw and, embrace mandalas and blah, blah, blah. So I'm very involved in world mind, but they're almost like vehicles to give me the sort of this time, space, and permission to get access to this kind of bubbling up from it's information from within is what really excites me.
I think that relates very well to your yoga of the cross idea, that when you're reading a book, it's more of a lateral move to the side.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I got this information that was really good. But it's similar to the things we do all the time in navigating the world. But when you get that connection to your higher self, or, you know, through and using perhaps geometry as a vehicle to go there, it has a vertical quality to it. It has a orthogonal relationship to the mundane. It becomes almost sacred to have that connection, because you're accessing a much more vast domain of intelligence than just any human could ever offer you. You know what I'm saying? And that's where it can almost have a religious like feel. But I'm not advocating making a new religion here. I'm just saying this is something that's very open to all. It's sort of, you know, you can fact check it on your own. You can you know, have that.
Well, the thing is,
if you want
fact checking, it's actually quite hard to explain it, you know, but when you experience it, and I think most people have experienced it. I think when I speak to anyone, whether you're into inner work or psychology or consciousness, or most people are open to, have you ever had an insight just come to you where you just knew it was right and you listened to it and you trusted it and your life changed, you know? Like, I mean, I know there's plenty of people that are closed off to that, but I've been successful in talking to most people about the principle of that. And people are very, I mean, it's a very common experience, you know, but it's easier to experience than it is to explain, or at least that's been my journey with it. I always struggle to explain what's going on there. We're getting much, much closer with this idea that there's an aspect of your invisible interiority that can connect with this larger field of the intelligible, as you call it. You know, it's like, you could call it, I don't know, the largest further reaches of the relative. You know, it's hard to put words on it even, but that kind of internal connection is really what it's all about for me, to be honest.
It's where
it's like
the magic
straight
is.
to the source.
It's like, I think it might have been Edison who said, like, invention is like 99% perspiration. So that would be like the horizontal effort, you know, just plodding away, and 1% inspiration. So that would be like getting the idea for the light bulb, you know, or whatever. Was like, it just took a second. And then it took like years of experimentation to like manifest that in the world. And so I think that's what we're after, is that kind of new information. And I think when you write something, let's say, when you're engaging the process of creativity, it's continually surprising to me, like what I will write. And it's very natural for me, because I'm a person, a human living in the world, to try to claim credit for that and say, oh yeah, look at what I wrote. Isn't that brilliant? You know, I'm so smart. But really, I don't even know where that thought came from. I think it's if I have enough wisdom to recognize that I probably shouldn't be, my ego shouldn't be claiming credit for it in a way, because my ego isn't the one who made it. Right?
Kind of come true you.
Yeah, it's like I had a lot of insights, for example, when I was making Secrets in Plain Sight. And I did a lot of research. I did all that horizontal stuff that you need to kind of get it all together. But sometimes I got these insights, you know, and I attribute that to coming from the vertical axis, from the invisible domain. And so that kind of is a good segue into looking at how the invisible domain is recursively dissociated, just like the visible mind is. And so there's your individual soul, right? But then there's also a collective human soul that Carl Jung explored with archetypes, that is common to all human beings. And I speculate that then there's even a world soul of Gaia, the Gaia hypothesis, that there's a soul mediating all of the different things on this planet. Beyond that, probably the other planets may have souls, and that the sun, it has a magnetic field that's so complicated, on par with the complexity of the human brain, that I know Rupert Sheldrake has speculated that the sun might be conscious. And I'm on board with that. You know, I think that every sun would have a consciousness, and then going all the way up, you'd have like galaxies would have a level of consciousness, and so on all the way up. And so there's these nested layers that kind of correspond in a loose way with the visible mind. There's typically a one-to-one correspondence between them, but not necessarily limited to only that. So for example, in a human individual that has dissociative identity disorder, I speculate that you've got the one body, but you have multiple souls interacting through it in that case. And in a way, we're lucky that that phenomenon exists, because it's very instructive and illuminating about what might be going on in the macrocosm of the universal mind, and how it subdivides into different parts and so on, and all of that. But so the soul, on the soul side of the street, you have your mind, and that mind has those three parts, that trinity that is also a unity. So for example, you have your, sensations, perceptions, and conceptions, and we tend to mirror that unconsciously, or I shouldn't say the word unconsciously, but without self-reflection on the structures that we make, let's say in government. We make the mind of the body politic divided into three parts typically, don't we? We have like executive, legislative, and judicial branches. And we make this because we're kind of mirroring the structure of our own minds in this kind of body, this being that we're making, that is the government. Like in the United States, they have federal, state, and local. In Canada, we have national, provincial, and municipal. In ancient Rome, they had consuls, senate, and assembly. It's always that way. It seems like it just kind of naturally comes that way, that we tend to unconsciously or not self-reflectively replicate the structure of our mind in the things that we make. So, and also in religions, they have this kind of sacred protagonists that they tend to come in threes. In Christianity, it's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In Hinduism, it's Shiva, Brahman, Vishnu. I can go on and on. In Buddhism, it's the Great Retreat, which lasts 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days. So there's this
Scott's favorite number, by the way, everybody, is 333, just in case, so you have to let him have this threeness to everything he does, but it is fascinating. And like the Holy Trinity is something that I absolutely adore. Like my cultural conditioning has been Catholic, and even though I'm sort of a lapsed Catholic now in terms of any kind of religious affiliation, the archetypes of the Trinity are sublime for me, the same with, Shiva, Brahman, Vishnu. That Trinity makes a lot of sense to me. And it's the same thing, it's the same thing, this 3 in 1, the Irish St. Patrick, and he held up a shamrock, which was like 3 in 1 is like what it was all about. Like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like archetypally, I dig the St. Patrick story. Do you know what I mean? It's like, 3 in 1, man. But
you recognize that it's this pattern that replicates itself in all cultures, in all religions.
And at all levels.
It's a
inside
deeper
and out
layer of reality, isn't it? It's a higher level of reality that then we're manifesting in a particular way in our particular cultures that we're in. There's all kinds of aspects in this chapter that I go into about, remembering how that works, learning how that works.
Well, can I jump in here, Scott? Because there's something that's dear to my heart, right? You just a title here called Making the Invisible Visible, right? And the reason I'd like to sort of hone in on that is a lot of the work that I've done, in transpersonal psychology, for example, my teacher, Stan Groff, speaks about the journey towards wholeness, and Carl Jung speaks about like the journey of individuation. And there's a great value, I suppose, put on the exercise of opening to your invisible domains. I was going to say unconscious realms, but I know we don't care for that word too much. But, you know, beneath the surface of everyday awareness, there are parts of ourselves that kind of drive us from beneath the surface. And in a way, we're kind of at their mercy because we're not aware of them. And so the idea of transpersonal psychology, at least, is that you open then to these deeper dimensions and you let the contents, I would call it the contents of the deeper dimensions of consciousness, rise into the light of your awareness, okay? And two magic things happen when you do that, right? One is you're no longer using energy to keep those contents repressed out of view from your awareness. So you now have liberated that energy that you previously had to use to keep things down. You've just said, oh, come on, let's go, and you bring it up. And then the second thing that happens is now there's more of you that's you in the world, you know, and this then chimes in with the idea of like the square and the circle, and then the idea of like bringing the heavenly qualities to earth. So I just really like the, you know, the encouragement to sort of make the invisible visible. And I can't help but feel on some deep level that it might be the whole reason we're here at all, actually. That we are TV sets for consciousness, you know, to come into realization or whatever.
Well, in a way, we're like a bridge. We bridge the invisible domains, don't we? Because
that's what I'm getting
there are
at.
quantum structures in our minds that allow that bridging to occur. That it's almost like the creation of Adam fresco that Michelangelo made of the, you know, Adam and God almost touching their fingers there. It's in that little spark gap there where where information can transfer from one domain to the other. And we tend to call that inspiration. Like the spirit has filled you up and that you're getting new information, right? And so that I've experienced that in writing or making a movie or something. I get new information that comes into my brain that I'm always surprised at. Like, wow, that's fascinating.
How cool is that, by the way?
And that's a beautiful process to cultivate. But I think that is kind of what we're meant to do as humans is make become a vehicle for manifesting something from the invisible realm in the visible realm.
That's what I feel too.
Like I was saying with creativity, the ego tends to step in and claim credit for it. But in truth, we don't know where the inspirations come from. They're presumably higher minds, higher selves. There might be a whole teeming zoo of characters there. And in fact, the default mode network of your brain, which is kind of like what we think of as the ego, may be more of a moderator of all of these clamoring voices. And you have all of these things that you're keeping under wraps to participate in civil society, right? But you have all these impulses and all these different voices in your head that you can access if you introspect, right? But consider that these might actually all be fictional characters, each with their own relative ideas of self. And when you see that even the default mode network, even the one who's running the show, the ego, is also a fictional character. That is a very profound insight. And I have a quote here from Rupert Spira that speaks directly to that. I'd like to read. The one thing that the separate self cannot stand is being clearly seen. To see the separate self clearly is to see its non-existence. And so when you have these insights and you perceive all of these voices are just different aspects of consciousness, of awareness, and that you are participating in that, but that you, the person you think you take yourself to be, is also a fictional character. There is no Scott, there is no Geoff, there's only a consciousness.
Mm.
And we're taking on these roles. These Scott and Geoff are the avatars, individual avatars of consciousness that are just having these human experiences. You
Mm-hmm.
see, like that. I think that's ultimately what's happening is we have there's only one consciousness that's floating all the boats.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we take ourselves to be that boat.
Yeah.
And it's really profound to realize that, wait a minute, I'm not just this individual, I'm all that is.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's easy to say, but the real magic is when, if you can experience that yourself, then you're like,
right on
wow.
track now, Scott.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is beautiful. That's what it's about. That's what it's about, you know. And it is hard to say, but I'm with you how you were saying it there. It's
Yeah, I mean,
beautiful.
I feel it's kind of cheap for me to kind of articulate it and say it because we know, we get it, Scott.
Yeah.
Thank you. But when you have that experience,
It's life-changing.
it is
like it's the richest experience you can have.
Yeah. And that's why, in a way, the highest wisdom has no words.
Yeah.
It blows away all of that.
Yeah.
You know,
I was can I use, I'm sorry, can I give another Ram Dass example? It's just because he's in my headphones every night these days, but
please.
It's kind of funny, the correlation between what we're talking about and what I was listening to, you know. But he was talking about you know, his guru, right, was like, I'm not really a big guru man, but I love Ram Dass, so you know, I'll drink the Ram Dass Kool-Aid all day long, you know. But anyway, Ram Dass was a spiritual teacher who went to India. He met this guru that kind of like was an enlightened being and his greatest teacher. And one of the stories he was telling was that his guru, right, was telling him about the rising of Kundalini energy, okay, and how that brings you like all the way up into union with all that is, where you dissolve as a separate finite entity and you realize that you are everything, you know. But, and so what he would do, he'd kind of go up here to, like, you know, what the solar plexus and the heart chakra and maybe even the throat chakra. But when he got here, he would just disappear into like kind of a sleep state, you know. And then he'd kind of like wake back up and say, oh, so what was I saying? You know, said, oh yes, well, I want to tell you about the dissolution into the all, you know. So he says, you come up here, then you come up here, and when you get here, and he just slipped away again, you know. And I thought that metaphor was perfect, because it's kind of like that when you're talking about this, you know, that it is very hard and kind of cheap to say, yeah, so like we are everything and we're kind of like the ocean in the drop and the drop in an ocean and da 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 da. And so when you just turn it into a thought form, it's not really what it is actually, you know. It's only through experiencing that. And by the way, I've got little tiny droplets of it, like when I've been lucky from time to time. I'm not claiming that I've been floating around, dissolving into the all. I feel my seeking self has an intuition that like it's a really worthwhile venture to explore these possibilities, you know. And I'm just like, I've got 10,000 lifetimes to go, I think, until I'm there, if you like, you know. But I just want to share that with people. I'm just reaching in the dark with all this stuff, you know.
Well, and then I in this chapter, I also go into states and stages, you know, like,
yeah.
So a state would be a temporary state where you go in, you have this this amazing experience, perhaps, but then after it's over, you come back down, and you're
and the toilet is still blocked up.
Yeah, and you're still, everything is as it was, but you have that insight in your memory, but it's not your lived experience now. It's a memory. And then stages would be kind of a developmental thing that happens over your lifetime, where you go through these different whole phenomenological worlds that you progress through. And we can kind of look at that if you introspect on your past ways of knowing and being in the world, and think about how that might have been different when you were a kid, or when you were a teenager, or when you were a young adult, and so on. And those are more persistent. They last for a period of time until you meet certain challenges that challenge your worldview, and then there can actually be a total change into a whole new stage of understanding, you know. So I talk about how that is mirrored in the world as well. in this book, and I have diagrams that show how the onion is sort of has layers that on the world side and on the soul side of the street. So for example, in this diagram, talking about subminds, and I show in the world, you have your individual human
this
body,
diagram
right?
here, isn't it? Yeah.
It's the other one, actually. It's it's earlier, it's on page 79.
Okay.
So on this one,
that's this one here.
That's it. So
yeah,
you've got
okay.
your physical body, right? And you have all these layers of the onion, the planet, the whole solar system, all the way up to the visible universe and so on. These are all like layers of the onion in world mind. And on the soul side of the street, you have your individual soul. And then you have like the collective human soul. You have the soul of the earth, the soul of the sun, the soul of all of the way up.
Yes.
So there's this corresponding recursion in both of these dissociations within on the world and in the soul. And so it's like, think of it that way, that at every level, there's this marriage between, like on the individual human level, there's a marriage between your soul and your body. And we've talked a bit about how there's a connection inside the brain. We focus on that because a lot of physicalists, materialists talk about the brain being the locus of consciousness, but actually there's more to it. The whole human body has, connections with chakras, these energy centers that connect the physical body with the subtle body, the invisible body. And so it's not just as simple as the brain. Take the whole body into account, and we have this kind of mirroring in these two levels of marriage between body and soul. And if you've ever seen a dead body, you would see how lifeless that is, how lacking of soul, how it's just a piece of matter,
inert.
Inert.
Yeah,
it's not, the soul is not there. Elvis has left the building, and so it's the soul that animates and breathes life into the life matter,
force. Yeah, you bet.
On all levels. And so I think to reduce all of that just to the physical does a great disservice to us, because there's a great complexity on the soul side of the street and a beauty that we ignore. Sort of, it kind of, by ignoring that with science, we're losing out on a huge amount of
an impoverishment of a sort, isn't it?
It's terrible.
Yeah.
I think our ancestors understood this because they had these religions that talked all about that. But I'm not advocating a return to that, because religion doesn't have the kind of rational quality of like saying, well, maybe the universe wasn't created in 6 days, in the year 4004 BC. It's more complicated. It's much more interesting. And I think that we should embrace both sides of the street in a way that's complementary to each other, that we don't get into a dogma situation on either side. And I think that, scientism gets into kind of a dogma state, and religion kind of got into a dogma state. But I think that if we were interacting between those realms, we would avoid that.
Yes.
And we would have more of a dynamism there that we would find answers and better questions more readily. I
hear you. So I like what you're saying there about like states and stages. And I know that you're a fan of Ken Wilber, so am I. And I quite like that whole analogy of state and stages. So a state is like, you have a deep meditation, you create a mandala, you have a psychedelic experience or something that lifts you way out of your everyday. You get a glimpse of something far bigger than the little you, and you're never the same again. And
or even as mundane, Geoff, as a dream. You go to sleep, you have a dream. And that's a different state, that you're experiencing, a temporary state. And in that dream, there's a different world that you inhabit. You're actually inhabiting the soul world, the collective human soul you're swimming around in.
And there's an infinite range of state experiences available to us. I'm quite like it. I love, exploring states of consciousness personally, but then in terms of like personal development and becoming a whole person or whatever, if I'm understanding it correctly, the stages of development, then they kind of take they take more time, first of all, and they kind of take like a little bit of work, don't they? They take like, I think Ken Wilber claims that, if you're working diligently, you can move up through these states or these stages every 2 years, and then you transcend and you include the stage that came before, that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
Do you know what's kind of
a
funny?
controversial idea, because he's saying that that you might not right now be in the ultimate stage.
Yeah,
and people are upset by that. They're like, wait a minute, I guess Ken Wilber must be, but why am I not there? And it becomes a point of contention amongst people, especially in what he calls tier one, where you think that your way of viewing the world is the only correct one.
Yes, I know. And I'm like, I do agree with him, to be honest, and he's obviously an amazing mind. But then like there's something about, like, say, Eckhart Tolle or the spiritual teachers, who say that like the one thing that you don't need in order to kind of like enter into enlightenment is time or thought, that like you already are everything commensurate with all that is. We've just forgotten it, and it's our ego selves that says, okay, so there's 7 stages. It's going to take 2 years each.
And
that's
it's going to cost $7,000 to do this. And you're like, I'm like, ready to sign up, and it's ridiculous.
It's kind of like
practice. There's no practice.
I can't help, and I can't help but think like maybe I'm like just looking for the shortcut, the spiritual bypass it's been called. But there's something in, like there's many enlightened beings, that never came across the discipline of transpersonal psychology, and they've broken through. And I believe it is possible to have like an instantaneous kind of like enlightenment, where you just break through to that field where you become.
Well, it's just a realization of who you really are. And so it's just like anything, you realize something and you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's like a figure ground shift, a huge one. Like, what are you saying? Like, I'm not just me, I'm everything. So it's a profound new way of looking, but that's all it is. And I think we make a little bit too much out of enlightenment. Like, when I get enlightened, well, I'm going to be like,
everything will be perfect.
Gonna like want to interview me because I'm enlightened. Well, maybe so, but it's probably you say before enlightenment you got to carry the water and chop the wood, and after enlightenment still got to do that. It's just a realization that you've had. And what I'm talking about with the stages is I think it's important to cover in the model, because it's something that happens. It's definitely a real thing that happens. But it's not the end all. It's just a note on the path, and it's kind of more layers of the onion. So if there's a diagram you held up earlier, and I think it's on page 81.
I have this one here. It's this one. This was the one I was thinking of. This is more like, what that is more Ken Wilber spiral dynamics vibe.
Well, it's more than that. So the Ken Wilber thing would be on the right.
Okay,
On the left, that would be the world mind side. And so the world mind side is more like a Carl Ernst von Baer, who was a 19th century founding father of embryology, whose ideas are the basis of modern evolutionary developmental biology. And the idea there is on the physical side, you've got the body that is developing in the womb, and it goes through all of these different stages that kind of mirror the evolution of life. So you go through stages that are common to the whole phylum that you're in, the class, the order, the family, the genus. And then finally at the 11th hour, right before you're born, you start to acquire characteristics that are specific to the human species. And I don't know if people are generally aware of this, but you go through these stages in the womb where you have a 2-chambered heart like a fish, then you have a 3-chambered heart like an amphibian, and then later you get a 4-chambered heart like a mammal. And you go through these stages where you're kind of layering on these different like whole developments that have been mirrored in evolution, evolutionary
This is like conception, embryogenesis, like the journey of like the sperm and the egg all the way up into, you know, birth. This
Yeah.
you go through these stages.
You go through
That's
these
what you're
stages
claiming.
in the womb, and then when you're born, you're this little human infant. But
Isn't that
if
cool,
we were
by
to
the way?
roll
That
that
whole
back, we would see the commonality with all of life in that development.
isn't mad? Isn't there sacred geometry in that whole trip as well? Like,
Oh,
you know, I've
definitely.
saw some videos of like, you know, it's like the egg and the seed create like just like a single cell initially, and then it splits into two cells, then it doubles, it goes 4, and then I think when it gets to 64, it breaks into the next phase. 64 is a very seminal. Is that?
Yeah, I
Did
did
you see
a
that
video
stuff?
way back in like 2002 or something of that
Blew my mind.
embryogenesis that, and it
Yeah.
actually lines up perfectly with the flower of life. If you make all the
Yeah.
cells transparent, you're like, wow, it's actually the flower of life. And
That
then
is the case, is it?
yeah,
It
it is.
literally
So
is.
there's a
Isn't that
beautiful
just
sacred
awesome?
geometry to that happens.
Mhm.
You know, that probably shouldn't surprise us now that we know that geometry is underlying everything.
Yeah, but it's super beautiful.
Then after you're born, you go into the kind of, we're talking about the soul development in through the human vehicle. And so that's what's represented on the right side of the diagram. And that's where I'm leveraging, you know, Ken Wilber's information that he's kind of brought together from other thinkers like Gene Gebser and Chris Cowan and other people who talk about spiral dynamics. And so
Yeah.
the idea is you go through these various stages, and different thinkers have different labels for them. The labels here are my own, but they're kind of like, you start off at an animistic level when you don't really know what's you and what's your mother, what's the world, until a stage when you're probably around 2 years old, when the ego develops, the default mode network in the brain gets set up, and you have an ego, and now all you say is mine, that's mine, give me that.
Yeah. Me, I, yeah.
And then you go through like an absolutistic phase where it's black and white. This typically happens when you're like a preteen, and you're like, everything is seen in black and white, right or wrong, good and evil terms. And then later on, you start to see shades of gray, and you get the multiplistic level where you start to have more complexity that you can tolerate. You know, you start to be able to understand abstraction, and rational thinking dawns on you. And this is usually in high school when this happens. And then later, perhaps you develop relativistic levels of comparing cultures, of understanding relative truth, and so on. And this is where like intersectionality, LGBTQ, tolerance, love of the environment, supporting the environmental causes, and so on can develop. And then there's another stage, which is universalistic, where you realize that all the stages that you've gone through, and all the stages that everyone has to go through, are appropriate to the phase of life. You know, just like in the embryo, in the womb, when you go through all these stages, you know, that replicate the order, the family, the genus, the species, you recognize that those are all necessary to make you a human, right? So so too are the developmental things that happen in the soul. They're all necessary to look at life in these partial ways, in these partially true ways of saying, well, I'm only concerned with my ego. I'm a narcissist, no one else matters. Or I'm only concerned with my tribe, I'm an absolutist, I only care about my ethnic group, you know, or my country. You know, you see how these circles of concern actually expand until eventually you're like, you know, a champion for the environment, you know, and so not everyone goes through all the stages. They don't. There can be things that make it difficult to move on, right, from these different areas of concern. But we recognize it in that these things do tend to follow a pattern.
Yes.
They do unfold in some way. There's a sequence to them. And so it maps beautifully to the diagram of an onion or concentric circles.
Yeah, it's perfect. Perfect. Yeah.
And all of that happens
totally
within the circle. In the other diagrams, it just represents the individual soul or the individual body.
Gotcha.
And then beyond that, we get into the vaster spaces of, you know, that we talked about earlier of the collective human soul, and the
soul of the planet, soul
all
of the
these
solar
things.
system.
It goes on. It's like, and we're only speculating here.
Yeah.
Because I don't know all of this like I know my own individual mind. I can only speculate that these levels probably exist. Like the sun probably is conscious on its own individual level, but I don't know that like I know my own mind, my own individual mind.
Yeah.
By the principle of as above, so below, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me as well. I'm very much lined up with it, I have to say. So I'm just trying to see, Scott, that kind of brings us to the latter pages of epistemology. And I know this has been a long video, guys, and if you've stayed with us through this, I know you're all in on Reality Atlas, so thank you. But I'm just thinking, is there anything else we need to attend to, Scott, before we sign off on epistemology?
I think
we're nearly there.
We've covered the high points. There's a lot more in that I encourage you to read, but I think that this is great for our conversation and kind of giving the flavor. And so we're going to close out this whole journey that we've taken through the study of knowing through epistemology, and we're going to look forward to the next video when we dive into teleology, or the study of causes.
Yeah, looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm just thinking maybe a nice closing, Scott, would be that last quote by Carl Jung, who we both adore.
Sure.
Would you be up for reading that?
Yeah.
Just to sign us off.
Our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe, and what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche.
That is cool. Carl Jung, 1875 to 1961, was an influential psychiatrist. That, to say the least, that's beautiful, Scott. Thanks as always. I really enjoyed that one. I hope our listeners and viewers did, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you, everybody.